All right, everybody. So as you can tell, we are split today. Luke's got his sweat towel. The South Carolina is getting to us. Brian and I are here at the Columbia office, and Luke had to go down to Charleston. It looks like he's having a horrible time at the Charleston office. We want to talk to everyone today about the Gilgo Beach killer Rex Heuermann. We've got a lot to talk about with that.
Is that how we pronounce his name?
I believe that's how you pronounce it. I've heard it a few times.
I was going to butcher that.
Yeah, Heuermann.
Heuermann.
We'll just call him Rex, because that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
T-Rex, he's a man-eater.
Yeah, he's a wild one. For those of you tuning in, this is Bring the Jury podcast with the Shealy Law Firm with Brian and Luke Shealy. They are twin criminal defense attorneys, and they also practice personal injury, stuff. So if you've got an issue from stop sign to murder, you can call on these guys. But every Monday we do these live podcasts where we talk about true crime cases happening around the nation. You can always catch us live or tune in later this week, whether it be on YouTube or streaming platform of your choice, to catch the full episode later. But yeah, I think we'll go ahead and dive right in for today. And unfortunately, I can kind of see y'all's questions. We do take listener questions, and I can, for the most part, read them.
Really?
So if you guys, So if you guys have any questions, send them in as we chat today. If we miss a few, sorry about it. But we'll let
Question one, why does Luke have a sweat rag?
Yeah, Luke, how hot is it there in Charleston?
Well, for you viewers and other climes, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and usually when I work from this office, I'll stay, as I did over the weekend with my family, with my parents' house. So we have a nice setup on Johns Island. But I have a 5-year-old inside and 3 dogs and my parents. And it's just the only quiet space that I wouldn't be completely rude to them was by coming out on the deck, which is normally great, but it was 95 with a heat index of 108. So if you see me sipping on a cold beer or dapping at my brow, that's because of where I am. But that's fine. I'm willing to sacrifice for everybody.
Now, Luke, we do have a office location in Charleston with air conditioning and a conference table and some nice exposed brick and some lighting. I mean, you didn't have to do this from the house.
No, I did not. But I did want to not have to drive all the way from Charleston after the podcast. I want to spend some time with my kid before he goes to bed. So there.
Man, I think we should really run this podcast, really draw it out. I mean, normally our podcast is about an hour. I mean, I think we should really see how much sweat can come out of Luke's face.
Yeah.
During this episode. But anyway, we'll move along.
We actually got a good question right out of the gate,
really?
That I think you all will appreciate. Why do the mother and the children have lawyers if they were already, I guess, ruled out of the circle of suspicion? Why is it good to lawyer up before you chat with any law enforcement?
Luke, you want to take this? And you mean his...
As it pertains to this case... anytime there's an indictment or any kind of public charging document that talks about her hair on a dead body, it's a good time to lawyer up. It's just to protect yourself. I mean, they're going to want to know, did she know anything? How could she not know all this going on for so many years? And at the very best, you willfully ignored something that was right in front of you and you could get charged for not reporting a crime. At worst, you're somehow an accomplice. And it's just a good idea to have a lawyer for any of those immediate family members that might even get scrutinized or interrogated. So, and I think just looking at some of the charging documents, they've got the wife squarely out of the country when this occurs, and we can talk about that, but you still don't want to incriminate yourself because they're going to be digging on this case to figure out what you knew. And sometimes you might go in there and have a lot of helpful things to describe, let's say, Rex's behavior as you're planning to go out of the country for a few days. Is he doing something that seems suspicious, like he was really excited and planning something, buying bulk duct tape and things of that nature, and you could be a very important witness against him, but in the same vein, you don't want to cross the line and get in the crosshairs of the prosecutor. So everybody needs lawyers all the time, anytime.
It's a standard playbook on a serious charge to, squeeze the family, let them know you could be accessory to all this. You could be obstructing justice unless you tell us everything, anything. And that basically usually opens up family members to want to lawyer up and then do everything they can to get their name and potentially their a charge from coming. So they just want to cooperate fully. I mean, his wife has filed for divorce pretty much immediately, which is kind of interesting in terms of marital privilege and that kind of stuff. But she's just trying to totally remove herself from his backing. So that's what's going on.
And we'll kind of circle back to her. I see you have some follow-up questions too about that. We will dive more into kind of the family and what's going on with that, probably when we discuss everything that they found in the home. But we're going to start off just kind of from the get-go of the start of all of this with the DNA evidence that, and she ties into that too, but the DNA evidence that linked Rex to the killings, which then led to the arrest. That's how we're but great questions.
So we're going to be talking about hairs, both Rex's hair and his wife's hair. And Luke, since I put you in charge of reading the bail application, which is, a thorough document regarding probable cause for the charge, what they have, and the state's request for no bail. It gives us a lot of factual information. This case is brand new. Luke, do you want to talk a little bit about the DNA and kind of the state's perspective on it, and then we can maybe respond a little bit with the defense's thought on it?
Right. Well, it looks like obviously once they discovered these bodies kind of by happenstance with a canine training dog, of course, you're going to exhume them. You're going to try to preserve it as best as you can. And they did find various hairs that they thought were of evidentiary value. And turns out they were. But they don't have anything to compare it against. But part of their research is, combing through cell phone records, figuring out who these women are connecting with burner phones and matching cars and things like that. I don't want to cover something we're going to cover later, but eventually they had him definitely as a target. So once he is a target, obviously they can do trash pulls. And so they did trash pulls, as we've seen in other cases, and found some hair or some DNA associated with some bottles.
That's what they did in COVID.
Yeah, and you're looking at like mitochondrial DNA as the source. It's not touch DNA. It's not blood. It's in hair, where they can analyze the hair and get down to the mitochondrial level and get a pretty good DNA sample. And basically, when they compare some hair on two of the women, specifically to the trash pull, it's female in variety, and it's got very kind of specific language. It's targeting. They say it matches a certain type of profile.
Mitochondrial
KLC2 haplogroup. But long story short is 99.98% of the American population was excluded from two of the hairs, but the wife could not be. So it's a pretty good statistical concept that two hairs on two bodies of these women belong to wife. And so then the question is, well, why is wife involved? Is she helping bury bodies? Because you also read other documents that they pegged her as being out of town on out of state or out of country trips during these. And so I think there's some pretty logical explanations for that. And then really damning for him is once they had him in his radar, they grabbed a pizza box out of a trash can and collected a DNA sample and compared it against another hair that is male and again has the same kind of statistical strength where 99% of the rest of the North American population, 99.96 is excluded, but he cannot be. And that came from a pizza box sample. And of course now they're going to have to go essentially use that as probable cause to get a clean version in court and through the process of a Schmerber hearing, which I think they might be doing currently. But that is how they got the samples to compare against, and that is pretty strong, unfortunately, for hair on a body.
Right, and unlike some other cases we profiled, like the Koberger case, where it was a real clean crime scene and there's not evidence on any of the victims, here we've got burlap sacks. We've got, a family full of hairs, wife and husband, that maybe, we got transferred evidence. Maybe, duct tape is amazing. It helps bind things and also will bring with it anything it touches from a house, from a car. And that's an easy way to assist in having a really messy crime scene. Luke, we can talk more about the challenges that the defense are going to have with the DNA, but one of the just to kind of back up a little bit. I mean, basically, a lot of these victims were sex workers, Craigslist ad, advertisements where people would reach out to them and they would schedule these arrangements to meet for the purposes of sex, and so it seems like at least 3 or 4 of these women that he's been charged with definitely fit that category, and presumably a lot of the other women of these bodies. I mean, this is all in the context, and I think Hannah mentioned this when they're referring to this guy Rex as the Gilgo Beach murderer, but there's a whole Long Island serial killer kind of aspect to this where they're linking, law enforcement has come out over many, many years and saying, well, and this sounds kind of terrible to say, but we think there could be 3 different serial killers dumping bodies out here. We can't necessarily say that this is one person.
But they all seem connected like a ring where they're all somewhat working together. Right.
And so that's kind of the premise under which law enforcement were investigating. A couple different DAs, the elected prosecutors who are coming through this area, and the latest one kind of set up a task force. And forensic science has evolved since these killings, and so they've got evidence that's suitable to be tested against. Whereas maybe they didn't have as good DNA testing before, but they kind of start with basic police work. And one of these women initially had an interaction with a guy that they want to link to Rex, but they get a couple things that are helpful to law enforcement. They get a description of the individual, and so one of these women that I think ultimately was killed, she initially, I guess her boyfriend or someone posing as a boyfriend, I guess didn't feel comfortable, kind of came out and scared away the would-be John. And basically that guy, that he left the home and then was, reconnecting with her.
This was all while, so she's a sex worker, and this was all while during, meeting up with a client. And so she was actually known for kind of stealing more money from her clients by doing this, where her boyfriend or whoever, partner that she would work with would come in, be very hostile, kind of violent, like an angry boyfriend, come in, scare the man off, and then I think they would kind of act that way.
So she eventually gets killed, but what law enforcement back then investigated was essentially there's a witness that talks about an avalanche truck, and they give a description of that. So that's one piece of evidence they have concerning the person that showed up initially. And then this guy that was probably shaking down the John, who I think law enforcement would say is Rex. Pronounce his last name again for me?
Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann.
Did you hear how he describes him?
As a big old burly kind of guy.
Yeah, but he specifically at one point refers to him as an ogre.
Yeah.
Which maybe that's rude, but that fits. Like I see, we're looking at a photo of him right now.
So 6'4", large, heavy-set build, bushy hair, and some roundish glasses were what this witness. So that's what law enforcement has, right? They've got women that are dying, they're sex workers in the area, and they've got basically a vehicle description, and they have a witness ID kind of description. So it's kind of similar to Koberger in terms of initial information. And that's what they're working with. Now, the backdrop for Rex Heuermann is that he is a successful architect with his own firm in Midtown Manhattan. He apparently has resources. I imagine these resources are being frozen as we speak, if not already. He's got various properties in Las Vegas. He's got undeveloped property in South Carolina. Interestingly enough, basically everything comes back to South Carolina.
Sure does.
We are, what's the saying, Luke? We're,
while I breathe, I hope.
No, it's, we're too big to be an insane asylum and too little to be, what is it? I mean, it's like everything crazy, every terrible headline comes back somehow related to South Carolina. Like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. The bottom line is he's connected, and law enforcement for a long time was dealing with the avalanche trunk and the witness ID. So that kind of brings them back to this task force and looking at, they have these burner phone numbers. That's the other thing that law enforcement has to look at. They've got numbers that are kind of like the last number that was communicating with these victims. And there's a pattern of these burner phones being used. So they do have a telephone number. They've got some information. They're pulling off these numbers. These numbers are being then used in at least a couple of these victims. Like after the killing, they're being used to call the victim's number to check its voicemail. I guess there's interest about who's trying to call.
Taunt.
What was that, Luke?
The allegations also that the victim's own phones were called to taunt family members. That's kind of a nasty little detail.
Right.
No, and I think after maybe up until recently, he kind of got sloppy, but in the beginning, these burners would almost be specifically used for one victim every time, and then he would drive the phone back to his home and, maybe do the taunting or check the voicemail or figure out, who maybe knew about him, and then ditch that phone and then get a new phone for the next victim.
Right, and so law enforcement has a physical description of an ogre. Basically, they've got a witness avalanche truck, and they've got these cell phones that are being triangulated for Midtown Manhattan, which happens to be where his firm he's been practicing out of for all these years. So, Luke, in your mind, does that get you probable cause to then get a search warrant to then go grab, technically they did trash pulls. They did trash pulls of water bottles coming out of the person's home. That's your curtilage, that's stuff that maybe is not subject to search warrants. And then they grabbed a pizza box that was discarded. So, they've definitely taken their time and narrowed in on this guy. I mean, he's been described, of course, when these charges come out, everyone that ever knew him is being interviewed, and he's been described a couple different ways as he's lived in this neighborhood where he lives with his wife and children for like 20-something years, and neighbors are describing him a couple different ways as both quiet and like has not had any imprint on our neighborhood at all. Like he's just not even a thought. And he's also described his neighbors as a nasty kind of guy, and Halloween time, everyone knows not to trick-or-treat at his door.
Oh no, why? Because he goes too far?
Because he's told them over the years, don't come here.
Oh, like he doesn't pass out candy.
Right.
Boo!
They interviewed middle school, elementary school classmates of his. One woman described him as kind of shy and a little bit awkward, but she would say he would put like little love notes in his locker. He's been described in a professional setting as arrogant and very, with his architecture profession as unique, kind of like an attitude and mentality of you should be lucky to even be talking to me, which is interesting. We get into that, profiling of, what makes a serial killer kind of thing, like in Coburger when he was, maybe a lot of people kind of harped on the fact that he was talking his way out of that initial encounter with, on the speeding ticket situation. He was trying to explain to the officer that, about the traffic laws and everything like that. So,
and forgive me if I'm getting kind of ahead, we may touch on this more later, but to kind of speak to that personality, on a lot of these burner phones, one in particular, there were a lot of searches that Rex would search, like Long Island serial killer. What do they know about the serial killer? How many serial killers are still at large today? What evidence do they have? So he was almost fascinated with, this is given if he's convicted and found guilty of all this, which, but he's almost fascinated with his own activity and behavior in a sense. And once he was arrested, one of the first questions he asked someone was if this had made the news yet.
It's time to, as we say on our Friday reel. But yeah, we've got a guy that's using burner phones exclusively. He's taunting victims' family members. He's been described as creepy and arrogant, but also quiet family man who made no imprint at all. One thing I found interesting in just some of the coverage, there's so many potential victims. I mean, yes, he's been charged with, based on DNA evidence on these particular murder victims. But, for instance, here's Shannon Gilbert as well. I find this interesting. She's a disappeared sex worker. Mm-hmm. She placed in, she's a Gilgo Beach one. Is she one of our victims that's actually been charged?
Yeah, not one that's been charged. She hasn't been connected with Rex yet, but she was kind of one of the very first that kind of got this whole snowball rolling. And she left like a chilling, 23-minute police phone call.
Well, that's what I want to talk about because, she's calling 911. She's getting a weird vibe from this guy. Mm-hmm. And she's calling 911 saying someone's after me. And she can be heard on the 911 call asking a guy that she refers to as Mike. And she's saying, asking him, are you going to kill me? And then she's later talking to 911 saying, these people are plotting to kill me. So she uses the plural form there, which I noted because that's pretty specific. I mean, these people are trying to kill me versus like an individual in a truck or something.
Right.
So that's interesting to me. It stands out a little bit. The profile, it seems like most serial killers tend to work alone. But it's interesting that she's referencing these people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely seems as though it's...
You want to talk more about that? What your thoughts are?
Well, just the nature in which, that phone call specifically, but then also I feel like this is just a pattern with, unfortunately, I guess pedophiles like this. They seem to kind of all be connected and work in a group. Obviously, this is one of the more, publicized, but just from... in my own experience working as a school counselor, unfortunately, I had a situation where we had to deal with this situation, and it wasn't just one individual. It was a group that kind of acted all together.
We got, at this point, 10 or 11 different bodies. So we've got 8 women, we got 1 man, and then even a toddler who was a child of one of the women that was killed. But back to Miss Gilbert, when they found her body, they initially ruled it as a drowning. And then for the South Carolina folks listening, much like the Stephen Smith case, where they initially ruled it non-homicide, the family hired a private, basically independent autopsy, and it came back as a strangulation. And that kind of spurred on this whole investigation, and the desire to find out who's doing this. And I will just say, from this reporting, this is an independent. Authorities over the years have basically said that they believe that there are 3 separate serial killers that could be involved in this. So, going back to these people are applying to kill me, I mean, it seems pretty sensational, but there's also a lot of bodies, and there's speculation that there could be up to 50 missing people. So that's kind of crazy. Luke, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be looking very hard at any potential female sex worker who went missing pretty much from earlier all the way up to current time. And the first thing they're going to do is figure out, based on cell records, who's the last person they talked to. And that's what they do in any case. But, someone like a Rex or a serial killer, if he in fact is, and a lot of the evidence is pretty damning for him, you're going to target a victim that no one cares about, someone that is down their luck, is a throwaway type person. And if you happen to be desperate enough to maybe be a sex worker, that might be a good odd. And they're also the type of people that would go meet a stranger, because that's kind of the nature of your job. Whereas it'd be pretty hard to get people who aren't sex workers maybe to meet a stranger. But I think they're going to be looking at the phone records of these women. Anybody that went missing, look at the phone records. And if they've now, through their search warrants, have a very long list of kind of burner phones and fictitious email addresses and on social media platforms that go along with some of these fake numbers, if they can find a link, then they're going to probably start making those connections. The only thing they don't have is a body. I mean, the bodies are what were fortuitously discovered due to the canine dog. But, if you're a serial killer who's killing multiple times a year to get your fix, you're going to have to start figuring out other places to find bodies. And, I don't know how they find that. They don't necessarily need a body, but they do need more than just perhaps a phone number that was linked to one of his fictitious accounts, because maybe he had sex with her and it didn't work out and he never killed her and she moved to Ontario. I mean, so they have to get across the line there. But I think, we're no psychology experts, but, Brian and I deal with some folks who would be considered psychopaths in our criminal line, and Hannah's got a counseling background, but, there's a definite need to get your fix and almost be found sometimes, be proud, get discovered, what's the notoriety. On the one hand, you don't want to get caught, but you also kind of want to really cross the line and be interested in who's looking. So I think that explains a lot of his comments and his searches and things of that nature. But I expect there to be many, many, many more bodies. And I was looking, and so they don't have the death penalty in New York, which I'm an anti-death penalty kind of guy, so that suits me quite well. But when you are looking at bringing closure, sometimes they'll say, well, look, lawyer and Rex, we like you for about 50 bodies, and we can only find 20. If you tell us where the other bodies are, we'll take death off the table maybe. And that's happened in some other cases. So they don't really have that kind of leverage here. But it's interesting. But I think this kind of fits a pattern, unfortunately, of easy targets, and what they'll be able to prove will be based on cell phone. I don't think a guy like Rex is ever going to give any statements. You're not going to have any confessions. He's going to be trying to cover his tracks very well. He just, didn't cover them well enough, at least for probable cause purposes. But
yeah, and we could talk to a psychologist about it, but like guess the profile that we discuss here is occasionally on our podcast of an accused serial killer. You know, you do it for the thrill, you do it for the gratification, but over time, if you keep killing, you got to keep, feeding that gratification. And then with the, in this kind of case, the taunting of the victims' families and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's got to be more like playing with fire, which gives you a thrill. I mean, every time you use a phone, it provides potential evidence for law enforcement. I mean, these search terms on these burner phones, why would law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer? That's a search term that he's alleged to have typed in. Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? And then I like this one a lot as he's using a phone. New phone technology may be key to break the case. Yeah, really? Sure. And apparently he was, one of his burner phones is being used, like, to date, like before he was arrested, is being used to call people, continue a lot of stuff. It's linked to one of his Tinder accounts. So, and you know what? Now they're in his house, and we'll talk about the house, is going to provide fodder for much, much further investigations. I mean, we talk about potential trophies and that kind of thing. We're going to talk about what they're doing at his house in a little bit different bullet point here, but the thrill seeker serial killers, they like to be reminded of their triumphs. They like to seek gratification where they can get it,
and it probably doesn't help that like platforms like Netflix have like multiple different series about serial killers, like Jeffrey Dahmer, and they even have, I think, the Long Island serial killer. There's like a show for that. Just kind of, it's almost like sensationalizing it all.
So he's probably been Netflixing and chilling on this documentary.
Totally.
Obviously he's presumed innocent, and there's a whole bunch to be done in this case. It's just getting started, but in terms of his search terms, he's very much interested in this case.
Yeah.
All right. So we got the witness ID, we got the truck, we've got the burner phone triangulation, kind of putting him in a location that matches both his work environment and where he lives from time to time, associated with a number of these victims. And then they go ahead and do these, set up a task force, get your DNA off a curtilage type trash bowl, and then it's just like a Jason Bourne movie or something. They're gonna watch him eat a slice at a local pizzeria, and they're gonna go grab it off of a table before it's cleaned up. That kind of stuff. So he was definitely a major suspect for a long time, and so this DA is ready to put him away and drop the hammer. So we talked about internet searches. Let's talk about this search warrant.
There are a few other internet searches that I think, well...
What else? What else we got?
Yeah.
He's got tons of...
There's some very graphic, very triggering, not appropriate for this TikTok searches, very explicit. But there's one in particular that I think is worth noting, and you can kind of Google that if that's something you're interested in. I do warn you that it is very intense, it's a hard read. But he used this one burner phone specifically to kind of do searches, and one of the searches is specifically about an Asian male dressed as a female. The term is twink. And that is the only male body that has been found, was that of an Asian male who was wearing women's clothing. So it's just very specific kind of nugget there. But yeah, that was kind of the last thing I wanted to mention for the internet searches. I don't know how that could be used, but.
So Luke, there's no state level death penalty in New York, but I'm just thinking about Dylan Roof here in South Carolina and his federal death penalty case as it related to hate crimes. Just think about, I wouldn't say that he's immune from death notice in a different court, but I just don't know. I don't think any prosecution would be there yet, but depending on how big this gets, what do you think?
You're wondering about whether the feds would seek death?
Yeah. What would have to unravel for this guy for the feds to be interested in seeking death?
It'd be a very political question, but it's not an obvious hate crime. Dylan Roof obviously was very racially biased and kind of fit that category. These are just certain prey to him that targets of ease. Maybe he does have a deep-seated and rooted hatred for women for some reason that's yet to be revealed. But you think about like the Boston bomber, and that was a death case. But I don't know. Nothing's jumping out at me right now that would make it the feds scoop in here and pick it up as a death case.
Yeah, the Boston bomber, that case got death as like an act of terrorism. Hannah had a question about like the sheer volume of potential bodies they associate with Mr. Heuermann.
Rex. Just because like the fact that it's, potentially 30, 50 people, could just the volume alone make him a candidate for that?
That kind of volume is usually a state level aggravator that triggers death. But here to put it on the table for the feds, it's usually more than just volume. It's things that invoke federal interests, traveling across state lines, obvious hate crimes, things like that.
Yeah, what if, he's been linked now to South Carolina and maybe another location, another state. What if they link him to a body in South Carolina? Could they then, is that like a loophole that they could find to...
Well, then South Carolina will do New York's work for them. But that opens it up to a lot of stuff. It just depends on where the bodies are and where they were killed. But if for some reason we're all linked to the kind of the areas that they're talking about in Long Island, then I don't know. But a good question.
All right. Well, let's talk about now that they have charged him. They also are all up in his business. All right. So he has a home in New York
with the Dexter room.
Talk about you may want to talk more about that. But I'm looking at like some of the things that's being reported are already pulling out. Of course, the media is going to kind of look at some of the creepier items, but we've got some things that are noted, like he's got 200 plus, firearms, which, a lot of people like their guns. Some people may think that's excessive. They're pulling safes and file cabinets. Of course, they're going to do all electronics. But they're weird stuff. Like he's got a portrait of a woman with a bruised face, which is interesting. He's got a little doll in glass. He's got some interesting things. That bottom line is everyone's got weird stuff in their house. Like people have things in their attic that are inherited from family members that passed away, collected at yard sales. Everyone's got something that could seem a little
Everybody has skeletons in their closet. Is that what you're trying to say, Brian?
Yeah, but Hannah, you want to talk a little bit about things that stood out in your mind from the search warrant?
Sure. And I didn't dive super deep into this, so...
Or Luke.
Luke, do you have any opinions?
Oh, I was reading the bail document. I didn't really cover a search warrant. That was not my homework, but...
Well, I will say something. I think just just the nature of the vault itself is alarming. I mean, it's a room that was locked off, that, you know, no one really had access to from his basement. And that's where he claimed to have all the guns, and I think most of this stuff was found. Also, just the state of the house is kind of alarming to me. It's very hoarder-ish, yeah. Just like piles and piles of boxes, just kind of like little, just an area for you to kind of walk around, but everything's just piled up in the house, like horrible condition. I'm sure someone with a psychology degree can speak more about the nature of that, but.
And of note to me is they're also digging up his yard. And Luke and I have had cases.
Well, because he buried all the bodies at the beach, right?
Luke and I have had cases where they start digging in people's yards. That's not good.
Wait, let's take a little detour here. Tell us about a time that someone dug up your client's yard.
Oh, we had a repeat client one time who was never charged, but they were digging up his yard over a missing person, and we were on high alert. Let's just say that.
Yeah, they had cadaver dogs out there. That is never good. That is never good. They're also digging up his back porch. So it's not good for this guy. And who knows what they'll find? I mean, they now got his DNA. They can link it to any missing person, unsolved body case in the greater state of New York.
Wait, I was listening to a podcast today that spoke about CODIS. So this is a platform that you can submit DNA in, and it like matches you to other cases, but you have to be like, he has to be found guilty first?
No. No, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, often it happens when you're a convicted felon, but I mean, basically it's a law enforcement dump of DNA.
Yeah, I mean, they'll take that DNA from the pizza box and run wild in CODIS. Now, what they get in court to compare for this particular case doesn't automatically get examined across the national spectrum. But I see my kid sticking his tongue out at me. But certainly what they pulled from the trash, they're looking for hits.
So what that can do is, if there's a hit, then that can allow law enforcement to do a number of things. You know, get search warrants, do more. You know, I mean, basically, it's something that, quite frankly, often allows for new evidentiary gathering, new potential charges based on probable cause. So, Luke, one thing I want to talk about is the state is already seeking a swab of his DNA via a Schmerber hearing. And that's, Luke, just explain to our viewers typically why do they need that? Why are they seeking his DNA if they've already got his DNA? Luke, you want to talk about that legal aspect, and then I'll talk to everybody about what his defense lawyer is saying.
And if he can deny that.
Yeah, I mean, they'll file a motion to demonstrate probable cause to a judge that they think he's involved in this case. And if they can establish probable cause under the case called Schmerber, then they're allowed to take a buccal swab, which is very non-invasive and really is just like you see in TV, a Q-tip, run it against his cheek, and they will then use that to test. And the reason they do that is because it's clean, it's pure. A lot of times in cases, you'll get a CODIS hit on your client because he left DNA on a scene, but it's because he was forced to put his DNA in the system from some prior crime. And so you can't really, for due process reasons, bring up as part of your current case, oh, I got Larry's DNA from that rape he did back in 93, and therefore, I want, after I got that hit, we're just going to go use that for this rape. No, you can't do that. But to get the example, you can certainly say, hey, we were surveilling Rex as a suspect. He was eating. He tossed a pizza box, and we swabbed that right where he bit. And lo and behold, statistically, we're comparing it to mitochondrial DNA off one of the victims. 99.9%. He can't be excluded. So, judge, all we need is probable cause. We've established that, plus all of the cell phones. please give us court order a fresh sample of his DNA to run against for the purpose of this prosecution. So it helps protect his rights. It makes it very clean, and it's really a low standard. So that's how that process goes. Based on everything I'm seeing in this case, it certainly will be granted. I think we've had a few cases, rarely, where it wasn't granted, or something was, sought for comparison and is not granted. But that's a very standard process in courtrooms all across America.
Yeah, and certainly a defendant could consent. However, that's not going to happen here. And a Schmerber hearing as well, as we talk about, like in the Kober case, they really wanted that preliminary hearing that got waived. It never occurred. But in a Schmerber hearing, the lead investigator has to get up and talk about his probable cause or her probable cause for the case. And I like to use them, even though I think I'm going to lose, as a great opportunity to cross-examine the lead investigator in court, under oath, sworn, and transcribed testimony. I mean, I did one recently that I knew I was going to lose, but I was able to really get the officer under oath on a lot of issues that really established that a co-defendant should have been charged. And he was forced to kind of answer in the affirmative. Yep. So basically it helps me with a third-party guilt case. And guess what? 2 months later, they had to charge that guy because I'm not saying that because of my line of questioning, but they know that I will always have that ready for a trial, that transcript on the initial Schmerber hearing they wanted, where he's admitting, yeah, we got this other guy, and he's really guilty looking. And so that, it's a great opportunity to examine witnesses. Let me tell you, Luke and Hannah, here's what his defense lawyer is saying. And we're going to talk about this lawyer in a little bit, Michael Brown. So he's been court appointed at this point because it's a very, very serious case. And, this guy probably has resources to hire whomever he wants. In a non-death penalty or in a death penalty state, like let's say South Carolina, Luke, wouldn't it be very appropriate to appoint a very experienced lawyer that handles death penalty cases? That's the norm, because most private attorneys, defending a death penalty case could take millions of dollars. And your average death penalty defendant doesn't have those kind of resources, so it almost always gets appointed to the death penalty attorney in the area. So here is appointed to a former prosecutor who's in private practice, and his website says he does everything from traffic tickets to murder cases, personal injury.
Wonder where he got that from.
But the state has filed for Schmerber. Hannah, your mom is texting you right now.
Hey, Mom.
But, and so as they will, and he's responded in a filing that basically says they don't have anything. And Luke, instead of attacking the DNA science, or whatever, he's doing something interesting. He's actually attacking the task force seizure of the pizza crust. He's trying that was a source of the DNA sample for comparison purposes. He's basically saying, look, the fact that they're saying, by the state's own admission or the people's own admission, the nexus between the partially eaten pizza crust and this used napkins and the defendant, my defendant, is at best a matter of conjecture and assumption and not fact. So, he's not challenging maybe the process or the statistical analysis, or is it touch deep? He's just like, hey, this task force says they saw him grab that pizza crust and chew on it for a while and put it down, and we grabbed it, and that's what he's like. No, I don't think so. That's conjecture, mere conjecture. So that's a little unique. Luke, how do you feel about that as a winning strategy?
Well, not very good. I mean, I'm not saying that there can't be mistakes made, but maybe he doesn't want to invest in an expert to challenge the scientific data, but maybe he wants to say, look, I know that he got that from Joey's Calzones on 32nd Street. And I know Joey. And Joey's always nibbling on the pizza and then taking samples and sending it out. You can't say that Joey didn't bite on that and Joey's not the Long Island killer. So, I don't know. I don't think it's a very good strategy. But maybe it's what he's working with. I don't know.
Right. So that's what he's saying. He's also attacking the physical description that we discussed of
He's not an ogre. An ogre is green.
Of a man around 6'4", largely built, with dark, bushy hair and glasses. So his response to that is basically, no one's identified my client. He's basically saying there's been no six-pack lineup identification, no show-up ID. He's just saying, this is not a true identification. Now, I actually like this a little bit better. Mm-hmm. There's no actual ID. So from that pimp boyfriend, would-be boyfriend, shakedown guy, they haven't brought him in to, presumably, it's just kind of a general physical description. So I find that more credible than attacking
the
pizza crust as, that wasn't my guy that was eating that pizza.
Yeah, at least at the heart of the shakedown guy is that he's essentially a criminal who at best is helping to steal from a would-be John. And
that guy's even around. I mean,
it's pretty morbid, though. You think about that particular victim, Amber, can't remember her last name, but, then the guy, she got his money, he was run off, and then he texts and says, I'll expect like a discount the next time. And she meets like the next day and gets in his avalanche. So you have to wonder if only she had decided he was a little too creepy, or maybe he won't be pleased about me taking his money the day before, she might be alive to testify. So,
this
kind of morbid, weird stuff going on.
Right. Typically, this hearing, it's an evidentiary hearing. Things have to be put on the record, but there's some advanced filings. But I want to talk a little bit more about Michael Brown. I'm on his website.
Well, that's the attorney for anyone.
Michael Brown.
I know we already said it, but.
I mean, this could be the biggest mass murderer in U.S. history in terms of individual serial killings. And, there's rules of ethics, there's rules, duty to your client, and typically good defense lawyers don't ever talk about a pending case, much less a case of this significance that maybe in some world could be a federal death penalty case, certainly could be multiple life sentences. So this guy Brown, what is a problem in my mind is I'm on his website and he is posting articles about his client on his website, evidencing Gilgo killing case voluminous, and it's a picture of him and his client. He's got articles about, if you go to his homepage even, see how everything's looking weird there. But he's got articles linking.
Kind of sloppy for those of you who can't see the screen.
Like here's this one. Suspected Gilgo Beach killer Rex Heuermann gives off icy stare in court as prosecutors hand over massive amounts of evidence. So he's got that on his website.
That's weird.
And it kind of embraces a theme or a description of your client as giving an icy stare.
It's almost giving off like he cares more maybe about being like a celebrity attorney.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He's holding press conferences. He's linking all the articles, every video from a press conference where he's outside of the courthouse speaking, he's using it. So unlike the Koberger defense team who are admirably representing their client as zealous advocates,
silently,
this guy is really putting every article, every press conference he can do as an active pending case, which is really a no-no. I mean, so like he keeps on putting his spin on the case and all these, even bad press, even like your client is giving out icy stares. So one day you're gonna be in trial and you're gonna be selecting a jury, and even though that juror is instructed, don't research this case, you're gonna be looking up stuff. A juror's gonna look it up and they're gonna see the own defense lawyer is posting information on his own website. So I doubt this guy is going to be the attorney that long in this case. Luke, how are your feelings on this what are your ethical sense on this kind of behavior in terms of this early stage of a very, very serious case?
I'm not a fan of it. I mean, it only hurts the client, and it's free press for the lawyer, and that's not what it's about. It's about zealously representing the client. And so can't agree with it. It's a pending case. You see a lot better kind of example of good lawyering going on in the Koberger case where their talking is done in filings. Of course, they're all under a gag order. I don't know if there's a gag order in this case, but still to plaster it on your own website is bad luck. So, especially while it's all pending.
It's also brand new, baby fresh. I mean, this guy was just arrested and denied bond. And his lawyer's already got 2 or 3 news articles and 2 or 3 videos of himself on the website. And that's astounding to me. That's what we call bad lawyering, all right? This bad lawyering is most likely unethical representation. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Could he then come back? Like, could Rex come back, years later and...
Yes.
Yeah.
He could, if he goes down, number one, this is a problem. This is an ethical problem. Mm-hmm. There are ABA rules of ethical conduct about, publicly, making assertions publicly about a pending defense that you're involved with. He's violating those. If his client finds out that he is posting things on his website that maybe adopt a certain perspective, like icy scares, so that kind of characterizes the client as icy, giving out icy stares. That's just terrible.
It can get you in hot water with the court, too. If you guys remember from the Murdaugh trial, I think Jim Griffin got dressed down by Judge Newman in the middle of the trial for liking some post that was like a New York Times article or a Washington Post article that was saying something about the evidence. And I think Jim Griffin just liked it on his Twitter. And, the prosecutors had reported it the next day and Newman dressed him down. So you really don't want to, when you're in a case like this, you have enough problems. You don't want to make more for yourself and your client. So it's good to keep your head down when all the bullets are whizzing by your head.
Mark my words, this guy's not going to be this guy's lawyer for the duration. Not the way he's acting. It's going to come back and bite him, maybe ethically, certainly professionally. It's also a built-in what we call PCR, post-conviction relief. He's allowing his client, if he gets found guilty one day, to say, listen, my lawyer never gave me a shot.
Right.
Look at these articles he was posting. He was ineffective. He was all about just becoming a celebrity lawyer, not zealously advocating on my behalf. So this is a problem right now.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah, we covered a lot, and I don't think that this will be the last episode that we will cover this case with. Just one little nugget, a little cliffhanger for you guys. Speaking of lawyers and pizza, the lawyer for Shannon's family, so Shannon circling back to kind of that first victim that really put all this in the headlines, her lawyer has been receiving harassing phone calls, weird phone calls, and at one time recently was called, and a man and a woman are chatting on the phone, and they are telling his family to, I hope you enjoy your dinner, which is very eerie, making comments that they would somehow be connected to the Gilgo Beach killings, just very weird behavior. And then later they call them again and say, we hope you enjoy your pizza. And then 3 seconds later, their doorbell rings and pizza delivery guy came, that they ordered pizza for them, which is just super creepy.
Wow.
And scary.
Yeah. Weird.
Very weird. So maybe we'll dive deeper into that next time.
Whoa.
Literally every single one of these topics that we touched on today, we could do an entire episode on.
Absolutely.
So you guys will be hearing more from us regarding this case as it's developing kind of all right before our eyes. If you all have any questions or comments about it, you can always find us on really any social media platform that you use to ask us any questions, send us any messages about it, anything that you guys find. That was really helpful with the Stephen Smith case. We had a lot of people sending in some good info that we had missed. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We will see you all next week. And this has been
Bring the Jury.
Bring the jury.
And Luke, it's on you to end it. So remember the power button that we talked about earlier. There you go.